Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1, action.
Assume nothing.
Brash, bald-faced blasphemy.
Question everything.
I find it extremely hard to imagine.
Open your eyes.
It is quite all right to be an atheist.
The fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists.
You don't have to be apologetic or quiet about it.
Challenge the opposition.
You see religion on 100 fronts losing the argument.
And start thinking. This is The Thinking Atheist Worldwide.
This show is an annual tradition. It is the time of year when we get a chance to just put aside all the heavier issues and topics that we address on this show, and we get to enjoy the Halloween season. We sit around the virtual campfire and we share some ghost stories. This is big fun here in the month of October. I want to say a big thanks out to Brenda McMorrow. She is a professional voiceover artist. She was kind enough to lend her talents and her voice to 2 different pieces of tonight's broadcast. Mostly, I just got tired of hearing my own voice, and she has a wonderful sound, and so she has read a William Wordsworth piece for the show tonight and also a playful Halloween children's rhyme later on in the broadcast, and she just knocked it out of the park. So a huge thanks out to Brenda. Author Ed Swomanen has again written something specifically for this show. This time for Halloween, it's a haunting story with religious, some would say sacrilegious themes. His story is an ingenious take on a specific religious custom that, when examined, is actually really creepy in its own right. So Ed's story is coming up about midway through the broadcast. We'll have some stories and submissions from our listeners. And of course, as I've done over the past 2 years, I will close the show with a long-form story of my own. It's something I've written and produced just for you. I am hoping you'll like it. I hope you'll find it entertaining and enjoyable. The whole broadcast, but especially that last piece, the last sort of main event story, it works best if you listen with good speakers, with a good sound system, and with a minimum of distraction. So, if you've got an iPhone sitting on the counter and it's playing through its little tinny iPhone speaker or whatever, or if you're in a place where you're going to be distracted every 5 minutes, this is not the best environment to be listening to the Ghost Story Show. Do yourself a favor and wait until you can find a better place, a better sound system, fewer distractions, hopefully a place with dimmable lights, so you can lower the lights and enhance the mood and really enjoy some ghost stories. But regardless of how you listen, thank you so much for listening, and thanks for making this yearly tradition so much fun. Real fast, our sponsor this week has some really interesting resources if you are interested in the science behind whether or not ghosts exist and the science of supernatural encounters and miracles. And specifically, I'm referring to the Great Courses Plus, a series I've been enjoying by Dr. Stephen Novella. It's called Your Deceptive Mind. Course 14 in that series deals specifically with science and the supernatural, talking about things like falsifiability and are the natural and supernatural compatible, and the claims that there are laws beyond natural laws. It's really interesting stuff. Novella is a rationalist and he's a skeptic. He's also a really good teacher. His is one of over 7,000 lectures available on the Great Courses Plus in a huge variety of subjects, from science to religion to hobbies to travel to health and nutrition, streaming right to your computer, TV, tablet, laptop, smartphone, and available right now for free to my listeners for 30 days, so you can sample from the full library at no charge. Let your education continue, and let your free month begin right now by going to thegreatcoursesplus.com/Seth Andrews. That's thegreatcoursesplus.com/Seth Andrews. A while back, in a little country town not too far from here, there was a problem. Animals had started dying off, one by one. In the morning, their owners would find them, lying on the ground with 10 holes in their chest. Night after night, and then morning after morning, the animals would be discovered, all across the area. Some near the street, some by the fences, some close to the barn, each splayed out on the ground with 10 holes in their chest. Well, one night, a man by the name of Fred was closing his store for the night. It was very late, and he was ready to get home to his family. He shut off all the lights and he closed the door. And as he turned around to go to his car, he saw in the distance a dark shape, and he stood there trying to make out what it was. And it came closer. Fred turned and tried to run away from it. It was the last move he ever made. And the next morning they found him, splayed on the ground with 10 holes in his chest. Obviously, this was big news in such a small town. The residents were scared to death, scared of more people being killed, perhaps even them. And so one night there were two brothers, very brave guys, John and Jacob, and they announced that they were going to go out in the dark of night and get rid of the problem, find the rogue who was responsible for this. They each took knives and walkie-talkies with them so they could keep in touch with each other. They said goodbye to their father, and they kissed their grandma on the way out, and they left. The two boys, John and Jacob, decided to split up. One would go by the site of the most recent murder. The other would wander the streets. And if one had an encounter, they could use their walkie-talkie to quickly contact the other. So they set out, each going their separate way, keeping a close eye on every shadow, and nothing seemed to be happening. It was just a calm night. And it seemed like it would be an uneventful night. But all of a sudden, John heard a cracking in the bushes behind him. He grabbed his walkie-talkie and quickly tried to call his brother. But there was no time. It was too late. A figure leapt out of the bushes and gouged his chest with its long nails. It was lucky that Jacob happened to be nearby and actually heard with his own ears the commotion, and Jacob rushed in to help his brother. He grabbed his knife and he was upon them, and slashing with great force, he took the knife and cut off the creature's right hand. And the beast screamed and ran off into the darkness. John was wounded, but not critically so. Jacob took him to the hospital, and they bandaged him up and sent him home. The doctors and the nurses and the hospital staff all called them heroes. And finally, the brothers got back home at about 6 o'clock that morning. When they walked into the house, only their grandmother was up, and they said good morning, and exhausted they went off to bed. Neither Jacob nor John noticed that Grandma was missing her right hand. I guess there is a lesson there, though. Always, and I mean always, keep your eyes on Grandma. You know, the sun goes down. You just never know. You never know what she's doing. She looks so benign, so innocuous, but you just never know. And if you see her dressed in clown makeup, well, then you really know you need to turn around and run out the door. I guess you've been following this story about the epidemic of creepy clown sightings that have been happening across the United States. Scary clowns in scary makeup, just some standing on the street corner staring at people, some walking behind them, some following them, jumping out of bushes to frighten people. Police departments navigating all kinds of clown sightings from coast to coast, which are obviously freaking a lot of people out. And in a few cases have become a public safety concern. Schools in Cincinnati apparently shut down for, I think, a day after there was a report about a woman who had been attacked by a man dressed as a clown. There was a similar report in Ohio that turned out to be a hoax just this past August, a couple months ago. A series of clown sightings in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Turns out that was part of a stunt promoting an independent horror film. Kids in Greenville, South Carolina reported that a clown tried to lure them into the woods with money. Another woman in South Carolina said she was just doing her laundry. She was at the laundromat, and right outside the glass there was a middle-aged man in white clown makeup, and he just stood there and stared at her the whole time. He did not speak to her. He did not follow her. He just sat there and stared. Georgia police called September the 14th with a warning about clowns who were trying to lure children into a van. That story turned out to be a hoax. The two pranksters arrested for that. Alabama, at least 7 people are looking at felony charges for their clown hoaxes. They reported terrorist threats connected to clown-related activity. That's according to the police chief in Rainbow City, Alabama. A police chief in Mississippi actually saw one of these scary clowns for himself. He was in his police car. He looked out and saw a man wearing a mask, a multicolored wig, and overalls. He's walking the streets with what looks like a machete. This was around 11 o'clock on the 21st of September of this year, carrying something that looked like a machete. The clown saw the police car, fled, and has not been seen since. He's still out there. Augusta County, Virginia has had several calls about clown sightings near wooded areas. By the way, it's illegal, I think in most states, for anyone over the age of 16 to wear a mask or a hood to conceal their identity, especially for the purposes of harassment. Florida has been awash in creepy clown reports. Others coming out of Ohio, Tennessee, Missouri, Colorado, Delaware, Texas, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania. In fact, I saw an article in the Telegraph. They posted video footage of a mob of students from Penn State who apparently were out on the hunt for 3 clowns that were allegedly spotted near the college. Police in Utah have had to publicly address queries from firearms owners who are asking if clowns can be legally shot. Of course, the authorities have had to remind the public, and it's tragic that they must remind the public, that, you can't shoot a clown for standing and staring and walking and generally creeping you out. No, this is not a capital offense here in the United States. The New York Police Department has been trying to ease public fear with reminders to the public that the rumors about threatening or dangerous clowns far outweigh actual incidents of threatening or dangerous clowns. Of course, they have had their share. New York reported on the 6th of this month about the creepy clown who intimidated people on a Manhattan subway, and he chased a teenager out of the subway with a knife. The clown apparently stood in the doorway preventing people from getting off, and then chased a 16-year-old who ran apparently out of the subway, through the turnstile, and up a flight of stairs. The boy actually having a scratch on his arm from the knife that was wielded by the clown. So yes, amidst the avalanche of stories about dangerous clowns, there are a few who have actually proven dangerous out there. It's interesting. There is a professor of psychology at Knox College referenced in a recent CNN article. His name is Frank T. McAndrew, and he was talking about a study done in England 8 years ago that talked about the things that scare people and referenced clowns specifically. And this study revealed that actually very few children like clowns, which is contrary to sort of how we've been raised and how we framed it. I mean, how many times has somebody had a party, a birthday party, some sort of festivity, a fair? They bring the clowns out, the clowns at the circus, because they're fun and they're happy and they make people smile and feel warm and fuzzy. Well, actually, no. This study revealed that very few children actually like clowns. It also concluded that the common practice of decorating children's wards in hospitals with pictures of clowns may actually create more stress and cultivate an environment that is the exact opposite of one that might nurture children. Clown-like characters have been around for thousands of years. The jester and the clown have been known throughout history to poke fun at powerful people. They're known for irreverence, for being darkly playful. The English word for clown first appeared in the 1500s when Shakespeare used the term to describe several of his characters. And of course, we can't speak of clowns without speaking of the famous serial killer John Wayne Gacy, who back in the 1970s appeared as Pogo the Clown at children's birthday parties. And he himself often painted pictures of clowns. John Wayne Gacy murdered 33 people, and he buried many of those victims in the crawl space of his suburban Chicago home. Many of us remember being terrified of the clown in the 1982 film Poltergeist, or watching Killer Clowns from Outer Space, a cult classic from 1988, or reading about or watching Pennywise the Clown from Stephen King's It. There's Twisty the Clown from American Horror Story, who, by the way, is in my Hall of Fame for creepiest clowns ever. There's a dark, dark shade to the clown in real life and in fiction. What about the clowns that simply wish to bring us laughter and joy? There's a man named Jordan Jones. He's a professional clown. He does this at least partially in his life for a living. He's an actor. He does parties and haunted houses and such. He is a professional clown. And he was interviewed recently by Time magazine. And he brought something to light that I had not before considered. He said, those who legitimately dress up as clowns in clown makeup and costumes for a living are genuinely now, in the year 2016, they're genuinely afraid for their safety. People have started looking at them differently, where not long ago, if they had a gig, they would dress up and they would get in the car and drive to wherever they were going and be the clown for the party or the event or the haunted house, and it was nothing. But now, when they're out and about, whenever they are in public, now when they are seen in clown makeup, they are received differently by the public. And Jordan Jones has said that he's terrified he'll be out in public someday and someone will see him and assume the worst and perhaps decide that offense is the best defense. He's afraid he's going to be attacked in some way by someone else who's just simply afraid of clowns. By the way, and I'm not kidding, Time magazine reports that Jordan Jones is so upset and so concerned about the plight of professional clowns that he started a Facebook page for them. And that page is called Clown Lives Matter. If you are curious about the creepy clowns and you'd like to know more about them and you'd like to see more of them, there is now a popular, hugely popular Twitter page that's dedicated just to photos and video clips of these scary clown sightings. Allegedly, they're out walking and stalking and scaring passers-by. Some of them are undoubtedly staged, but I'll admit it makes them no less creepy. The page on Twitter is Spooky Clowns, and it already has over 165,000 followers.
Lucy Gray, a poem by William Wordsworth. Oft I had heard of Lucy Gray, and when I crossed the wild, I chanced to see at break of day the solitary child. No mate, no comrade Lucy knew. She dwelt on a wild moor, the sweetest thing that ever grew beside a human door. You yet may spy the fawn at play, the hare upon the green, but the sweet face of Lucy Gray will never more be seen. Tonight will be a stormy night. You to the town must go, and take a lantern, child, to light your mother through the snow. That, father, will I gladly do. 'Tis scarcely afternoon. The minster clock has just struck 2, and yonder is the moon. At this the father raised his hook and snapped a band. He plied his work, and Lucy took the lantern in her hand. Not blither is the mountain row, with many a wanton stroke. Her feet disperse the powdery snow that rises up like smoke. The storm came on before its time. She wandered up and down, and many a hill did Lucy climb, but never reached the town. The wretched parents all that night went shouting far and wide, and there was neither sound nor sight to serve them for a guide. At daybreak, on a hill they stood that overlooked the moor, and thence they saw the bridge of wood a furlong from their door. And now they homeward turned and cried, "In heaven we all shall meet," when in the snow the mother spied the print of Lucy's feet. Then downward from the steep hill's edge they tracked the footmarks small, and through the broken hawthorn hedge and by the long stone wall. And then an open field they crossed, the marks were still the same. They tracked them on, nor ever lost, and to the bridge they came. They followed from the snowy bank the footmarks one by one, into the middle of the plank, and further there were none. Yet some maintain that to this day she is a living child, that you may see sweet Lucy Gray upon the lonesome wild. All rough and smooth she trips along, and never looks behind, and sings a solitary song that whistles in the wind.
I had a ghost story submission in from Esmar, who had this personal account to share. Esmar said, "I come from a rather remote part of the Faroe Islands, and this is something I experienced as a late teen. Late one dark winter night, coming home from band practice, I was driving home. Somewhere on my way up the narrow mountain road with no street lights and into the one-lane tunnel, also with no lights at all, there was an ear-piercing humanoid scream coming from within my car. I was obviously shocked, but I was trying to be rational, thinking it was just the CD I was listening to. But no, while changing the song, the scream started again. Think about a person burning alive, and you'll be in the ballpark of what the scream sounded like. I looked behind me to see if maybe there was someone shouting from a car behind me, or someone was playing a prank on me from the back seat, but I was completely alone. Now, obviously, I was starting to get paranoid, so I looked in the rearview mirror and I saw a white shape and/or light rapidly swinging back and forth in the back of the car. But mind you, it was only in the mirror. The scream continued at random intervals while I sped frantically to the village I lived in. I made it home, parked the car, and ran out. Going up the stairs to my house, I still heard the scream coming from inside the car. I went in, locked the door, and ran into the living room. There, all the pillows sequentially fell off the sofa, and the scream stopped. After that, it was dead quiet. Needless to say, I didn't sleep that night. I would like to think it was because I'd been too tired and ended up hearing things. But who knows? Okay, Esmar, the second I hear the first scream, there's no continuing the drive home. Yeah. If it's inside the car and I detect it's inside the car and I can't explain where it's coming from, my ass pulls directly to the shoulder or the dirt on the side of the road. I'm out. I'm walking home. I'm doing anything but being in that vehicle. Greg sent a message. He said, I wanted to share a spooky encounter with a ghost I had a few years ago when I was working as a security guard in Washington. I was posted at a food processing facility, and twice a shift I had to take a truck out and inspect the pump houses and make sure there weren't any squatters in them. One night I was on the midnight to 8 a.m. shift, and I was on my first patrol. It was a new moon, and I was already on edge from being startled by a rattlesnake. I was turning to leave the fields when I saw something to my immediate left. It was a white shape, and it looked like it was a pale figure sprinting toward my driver's side door. I grabbed my flashlight and turned it on, pointing at whatever it was, and it turned out to be the white patch on the butt of a deer. as it was springing away from my truck. I guess that goes to show how easy it is for perfectly natural things to get perceived as ghosts. Thanks for the show, Greg. Greg, thanks for the message. I have Matt on Skype. Matt, you're on the Thinking Atheist radio broadcast. How's it going, man?
Having a good one. Thanks for having me on.
We're in the Halloween spirit. Do you have a story for the broadcast, a ghost story or a ghostly encounter?
I do, actually. It's actually, in some ways, it's also the story that was a bit of a catalyst on me not really becoming to believe in the superstitious. Because there were a couple of events that happened, but the real star of this story is actually the house that we lived in at the time. I'm from Australia, and I lived in country Victoria, which is a state in Australia. But this house, about 150 years ago, was a big property, like servants' quarters, and it even had a schoolroom out the back. And the house itself had no indoor plumbing. The yard by the time we'd come there, the house had been abandoned for a year or two. And at the time we were living there, it didn't have electricity either. So every time that you needed to use the restroom, you always had to go outside. And if you had to do it in the middle of the night, you couldn't turn on a light either. So it was just the house itself was a stuff of nightmares. And the last person to live there was supposed to have died there, and he still haunted the place. There was a little bit of superstition. At the time, I was only about 8 or 9. And so we kind of believed that, maybe this place was haunted. So here I am. It's the middle of the night. It's winter time. It's freezing cold, and it's a bit blustery and a bit stormy. And I wake up in the middle of the night, and I need to go outside for a whiz. And I was so scared. I was so scared and cold, and I just didn't want to go, but I had to. And so it took me a good while to build up the courage. And the closest thing next to me was the boots that I had to wear outside. Well, these horse riding boots, and these boots had a bit of a heel, essentially a high heel boot. And the hallway at the time wasn't carpeted or anything like that. So I put on these boots and I'm walking down the hall and I'm terrified and I'm walking so slow, and these boots had this ring on the wooden floors and it had a ka-clump, ka-clump. And I'm just terrified and I'm walking down the hall, and just as I'm passing my father's room, he calls out to me and I have a bit of a fright. He says, "Is that you?" And I says, "Yeah, it's me." He says, "Is that you, Matt?" I said, "Yeah." And so I walk outside, done the business, and ran back as fast as I could to get in bed. Well, the next night, same thing happens. I wake up in the middle of the night and I need to go outside, use the restroom, and I'm terrified. And finally, I'm about to step out of the bed, and all of a sudden, down the hall, I hear ka-clump, 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 and I'm petrified. I'm terrified because old Mr. Ewing is walking down the hall, and I was always scared of that. And then, to top it all off, all of a sudden, I hear my father, "Is that you, Matthew?" But I was so terrified.
It was not your father who was making the footsteps.
No, that's what even terrified me out the most, or even more, is because he thought I was walking down the hallway again like the night before.
Did you ever find an explanation for what the sound was?
I did. I did, and it's a long story, but what it actually was is we had this honorary old goat that lived there.
I'm sorry. The word goat just conjured up a mental image for me, and I just picture a goat trotting along the wooden floors.
Well, it's a cold, blustery winter night. We didn't find this out until about 12 months later when something similar happened. But what it turned out to be is this goat was sheltering from the stormy nights and walking down the front porch. But the acoustics worked in such a way that when it was walking down the porch, it sent the acoustics down the hallway of our house. That's what turned out to be the footsteps.
But once you discovered, it sort of led to your greater skepticism about such things in the future?
Well, there was an earlier discovery because the initial footsteps down the hall really set off everyone's imagination, including my father's. And my father is a policeman. We're not religious. We're never really brought up that way. We just never were. The only time my parents ever took us to church is when their marriage was going to break. But about 6 months later, I'm back in bed again, right? And I hear this heavy breathing coming from outside the window. What's that? And so I called my old man in and I says, Dad, there's heavy breathing, and he could hear it. And so we all go running outside, and he was a policeman, so nothing really scared him. And we all went running outside. Couldn't hear this heavy breathing anymore. Must be imagining stuff. And we walked back inside. About 20 minutes later, back is with this heavy breathing, and that's it. We know something's out there. So we all go running outside again, and all of a sudden, up from this tree comes this massive roar, and we all of us just shit ourselves. Pardon my French. Oh, what was that? And look up in the tree, and it was a koala.
Well, thanks for not saying the drop bear, because, you know, I've been told about the drop bear many times. A koala was up there breathing heavy in the tree?
Well, it was a male, and your listeners in Australia would know this. Well, your country listeners would know this, but they're actually really noisy. The boars are, the males are, when it comes to rutting season. They'll climb up a tree and bellow and haul and all those sorts of things. And this koala was getting ready to do that just outside my window in the house that I lived in, which I thought was haunted. And so that initial discovery, you know, is what began that skepticism.
Do the homework, verify, collect evidence, see what's really out there, huh?
Yeah, exactly, because it might just be a bloody koala up a tree.
Well, Matt, thanks for sharing your story. That's fantastic. I hope you and yours have a wonderful Halloween holiday as well.
Thanks, mate. Thanks. It's going to be fun. I hope you do too.
There's a girl driving along I-70 on the way back to Colorado after she'd been out visiting her relatives in Illinois. About 1 o'clock in the morning. It starts raining and she realizes she's almost out of gas. But she sees a sign for a gas station 3 miles ahead, and then she breathes a sigh of relief. But after she covers the 3 miles and gets there, she realizes it's one of those old, run-down gas stations. You know these places when you drive in and it almost seems abandoned. You can't even tell by looking if the place is open or closed, if anyone actually works there, or if the gas station's been abandoned for years. You can't tell. This girl's scared to stop, but she really doesn't have any other choice. The gas tank is on empty. And as she pulls in, an old man with a disfigured face comes running through the rain. And he grabs the nozzle off the pump and he puts it in the tank, and he asks her for her credit card, a full-service gas station. That's an unusual sight these days. She cracks her window and she hands the credit card to him, and he runs back inside. Well, after a few seconds, he comes back out and he says to the girl, "You have to come inside. Your card has been declined." Reluctantly, she walks inside the gas station. The old man grabs her by the shoulders, and his mouth opens, but before any noise can come out of him, she strikes him with a can of Pennzoil sitting on the counter. She just grabs it and hits him over the head with it and runs back to her car, and she takes off. She just peels off, the old man screaming and flailing his arms at her. She gets a few miles down the road. Very shaken up, she turns on the radio and tries to relax. But as she looks in the rearview mirror of her car, she sees in the back seat the head and shoulders of a figure, and the arm of a figure, the arm holding a hatchet. It is the last thing she ever sees. You see, apparently the old man at the gas station was trying to give her a warning. Robert sent a message and said, "I wanted to submit a few of my original 2-sentence horror stories for the upcoming Ghost Stories podcast. Before, you read some 2-sentence horror stories on a previous show. I'd never heard of them, but I liked them and liked the challenge of trying to scare with such a limited format that I became inspired to author some. I've written around 50 and posted several last year for my friends on Facebook to enjoy. Here are a few of my favorites, which you may use during the podcast if you wish. Enjoy, and happy Halloween, Robert." Okay, Robert, I'll read these on the air. 2-sentence horror stories. She's been gone over a year now. I've never been good at goodbyes, So that's why I keep her in the freezer. I hear it again, the muffled voices, floorboards creaking, and the sound of something heavy being pushed across the floor, as I warily climb the stairs and slowly reach for the door, which has remained cautiously locked all these years. Silence. I can't move. I can only stare up at the harsh white light above the table on which I lay. I tried to scream when I heard the doctor announce, "Time of death, 5:39 p.m. She looks as beautiful in the candlelight and wedding dress as she did years ago, when they promised to love till death do us part. He can't imagine his life without her. So after he swore his undying love again, he lifted her veil and kissed her lifeless lips." Robert, your last story reminds me of the real-life story of Karl Tanzler, a man who once called himself Count Karl von Kossel. No, he wasn't a real count, but he apparently lived in a kind of fantasy world, and apparently Karl Tanzler would do anything for love. And again, this story is absolutely true. The year is 1930. Karl Tanzler met the woman that would change his life and steal his heart forever. Karl was in his 50s. Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos was 21. A quarter century his junior, a young Cuban-American woman who had suffered from tuberculosis. She was an X-ray technician at the hospital where she sought treatment, and Karl made it his life mission to cure her. Karl, apparently shifting from reality to fantasy, conjured up in his own mind medical degrees and medical qualifications that he did not actually have, touting options and solutions and cures as if he knew what he was talking about, but he was living in a fantasy world. And only a year later, in October of 1931, Elena died of tuberculosis. In her final months, Karl Tanzler had obsessively declared his love for her. He had showered her with gifts and tried desperately to save her with things he called diagnostic equipment and curative concoctions. And even after she was dead, Karl Tanzler could not let her go. He visited her mausoleum every single night for a year and a half. In 1933, he had been claiming that Elena's spirit was begging him to take her body with him. And so he went to the mausoleum and he retrieved her body and he packed it up in his toy wagon and he carted Elena back to his house. And Karl Tanzler kept in his home and cuddled in his bed for the next 7 years the corpse of his dead wife. Suspicions with friends and neighbors grew and grew. Why did he stop going to the cemetery? Why was he buying women's clothing and beauty products? Why was he dancing around with a life-sized doll in his window? It was 7 years later, in 1940, when Elena's sister finally confronted Karl. And so he led her upstairs to the bedroom, and he showed her the body of what she thought was a life-size doll of her sister in Tanzler's bed. But police were called, and when they investigated, they realized, of course, this was no doll. This was Elena in the preserved flesh, or what was left of it. Over those 7 years, Karl Tanzler had restored her body with wire. He had stuffed it with rags. He covered the decaying skin with plaster and wax. He replaced her eyes with glass ones. And he had repaired, quote-unquote, repaired her vagina with a paper tube. And although it was never confirmed, there is great speculation that Karl Tanzler consummated his marriage to Elena after she was, in this way, resurrected. A trial was held for Karl Tanzler. The charge was wantonly and maliciously destroying a grave and removing a body without authorization, but Karl was never convicted, because the statute of limitations on his crimes had expired. Elena was reburied in an unmarked grave, and Carl Tanzler quietly lived out the rest of his years in Pasco County, Florida, until he was found dead in 1952, allegedly clutching a doll that he had made, a doll that looked just like his long-dead wife, Elena. Our next story was written just for this broadcast by Ed Suominen. You might be familiar with Ed's name from previous broadcasts. Last year, we read his original work called Abraham's Excellent Adventure. Just a few months ago, shared a story called The Stones of Tribulation. And he has again written something just for us, a story appropriate to the Halloween holiday. If you want to read the story after the fact and share it with your friends, I will include the link to Ed Suominen's blog in the description box of this broadcast. The story itself is called This Is My Body. Luke 22:19. And when he had taken some bread and given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. There is a field in the French countryside outside Paris, where rough-hewn stones and fragments of bone keep turning up under the plow. The old man who has stopped and examined these finds over the years thought they were the result of some shell exploded during the First World War. But one day he came across a gold chalice with bloodstains that would not wash off. The chalice had not been seen for 700 years, when 3 frightened laymen muttered frantic prayers to the Blessed Virgin while setting fire to the planks and timbers of a little Dominican monastery to erase its memory. They were careful not to touch the chalice or the circular loaves of flatbread that sat next to it as they put their torches to the altar on which it rested. Then they cut the throats of a priest and 6 monks, begging forgiveness for what the bishop had commanded them to do. As they tried to leave, their work complete and the flames now hot at their backs, they found that the door had been blocked. Only the bishop had remained outside, and he would go to his grave with the story of what had happened inside the walls that would crumble, forgotten, among the bones at the site that became a field in the French countryside outside Paris. A few days before the fire, standing before the altar alongside his 5 fellow monks, Brother Amos had watched the priest give thanks and mutter his invocations to the God Amos did not worship. For once, he listened closely to the familiar stream of words from the priest, who seemed not to hear them himself as he plodded through his routine business of celebrating Mass in the little church he visited once each week. He implored the Holy Spirit for the miracle of consecration, raising a loaf of flatbread in the air for the monks to adore in the flickering candlelight, so they could witness its miraculous transubstantiation into the body of their Lord. The wine in the chalice resting there on the altar would undergo its own change in a moment too, into the very blood of Jesus. This transubstantiation thing was a neat trick, Amos thought. Just conceal the flesh and blood with accidents of bread and wine that stick around after consecration that look and taste identical to bread and wine. It was some mysterious substance that got replaced, Aquinas said, and the Dominicans were taking his Summa Theologica as dogma now. Amos found it as tedious as all the other books they spent their days copying, hunched over in the scriptorum. The bread substance just disappears, replaced with the substance of Christ's body. It wasn't just a sign of his body, as Beringer had suggested centuries ago in a moment of rational thought, which of course he'd had to repent of. No, it's the real thing. except it can't be detected by sense nor understanding, but by faith alone. Amos never detected anything other than stale flatbread, but he had no faith at all. Looming inside him was something else, something that made the others around him uneasy, feeling that all was not quite right about this strange brother with the penetrating dark eyes. It even disturbed Amos to realize what he was, but he could be nothing else. "Take this, all of you, and eat of it," the priest said, reciting the words of institution, "for this is my body which will be given up for you." His fingers held the edges of the circular loaf lightly with practiced reverence, yet it was not a body the monks saw, but a loaf of flatbread. Amos was tired of invisible things that could only be seen by faith he did not have. He only rarely and secretly used his dark talents, preferring not to have his life end tied to a burning stake. But just now, a spark made the leap over his usual caution, and a decision flared in his head. Today, he said to himself, an accident will happen to the accidents. The priest's arm shook visibly as he felt something changing in his grasp. Amos smiled as he saw the listless mask of bored routine transform into sudden shock on the priest's face. "What's the matter, Father?" The priest squinted hard at the bread that was now shrinking back in places from its round border. He brought his hands down closer to see past any shadow tricks of the gloomy candlelight, but that wasn't the cause of what he was seeing. His eyes opened wide as his fingers adjusted their hold on the new contours of the changing thing they held. Only the bottom part of the loaf remained flat. The rest was pulling itself into little baguette shapes, 6 of them in total, one much wider and flatter than the rest, 4 of them all close together and long. The priest moved his fingers to the bottom, to the one remaining flat area no bigger than his palm. A palm. Yes, that's what it looked like now. And the skinnier baguettes extending from it were forming into joints. It didn't look like bread at all anymore. The crust had a different texture. There were crisscrossing lines on the flat area. The priest turned the thing around to look at the other side, and when he saw the knuckles and tendons strung tight under skin that had just formed from the crust of what seconds ago was bread, he let out a long and quiet, "Oh." Amos couldn't tell if it was from shock or maybe reverent adoration. But the man clearly hadn't been expecting his little incantation to actually produce what he'd said it would for once. The hand was complete now, nails on the fingertips and a ragged stump at the end of the palm, with 2 broken off bones and stringy things sticking out. "A blessed apparition," a monk standing next to Amos said quietly, probably doubling the number of words he'd used all week. "The species of our Lord has been formed in our eyes for the purpose of showing that Christ's body is truly under this sacrament." The priest looked down at the grave old monk, and then back at the hand he was holding. He didn't seem convinced that it was either blessed or an apparition. "It's not just my eyes seeing it as a hand," the priest said, all his professional solemnity abandoned. "It feels like one." He hefted it, moved his fingers around the edge of the palm, and then delicately touched the fingertips, pushing the fingers up and down, testing the joints. The white and gray and bluish glistening horrors at the other end he left alone. "Proceed," said Amos, a single word spoken loud and expecting no dissent. The brothers leaned forward and looked over at him, this monk daring to command a priest during Mass. The priest stood mute, uncertain, his eyes flicking from the hand to Amos and back again. "Proceed," Amos said again, his voice turning upward, impatient. He stepped toward the altar and pointed at the knife the priest carried on his travels. There was nothing else for the priest to do. He set the hand down on the altar, saw the chalice there, and remembered the order in which the communion rite must be performed. He picked up the chalice and swallowed what was in it. He somehow forced the mouthful down, gagging, his eyes crammed shut. He searched out the watching eyes of the monks, and they knew what he had just drunk. The priest wiped his mouth and got to working with his knife. He stepped down from the altar holding 7 pieces of the hand in one of his own. The last piece was for him, and it could wait. "This is the body of our Lord, given for you," he rasped to Amos, his shaking fingers holding the thumb, severed at the base, in the space between their faces. Amos could see the bloodstains still on the priest's mouth. He smiled slightly, letting the priest know that, yes, he was the one who had lifted the veil. And he did not regret it, even knowing that the bishop would never let word get out and expose the sacrament for what they all said it really was. He opened his lips to receive the body of Jesus Christ, a raw and ragged piece of it, with no accidental appearance of bread to hide the horror of what they were doing. He extended his tongue and took the thumb into his mouth with it, turning toward the pious monk next to him, who no longer looked reverent at all. Amos wrapped his tongue around the thumb inside his mouth, feeling the delicate, dry texture of the skin, and then began scraping the flesh from the bone with his teeth, as he wondered what it would feel like to burn.
The Hearse Song, a children's rhyme. Don't you ever laugh as the hearse goes by, for you may be the next to die. They wrap you up in a big white sheet from your head down to your feet. They put you in a big black box and cover you up with dirt and rocks. All goes well for about a week. Then your coffin begins to leak. The worms crawl in, the worms crawl out. The worms play pinochle on your snout. They eat your eyes, they eat your nose, they eat the jelly between your toes. A big green worm with rolling eyes crawls in your stomach and out your eyes. Your stomach turns a slimy green, and pus pours out like whipping cream. You spread it on a slice of bread, and that's what you eat when you are dead.
A long time ago, there was a young man who met and fell in love with a beautiful young woman. She was always dressed so exquisitely, and she always wore a black ribbon around her neck. It wasn't long before they were married, and they moved into a little cottage by the sea. They started out a very happy couple. But finally, this young man became more and more curious as to why his wife wore a ribbon around her neck all the time. One day he decided again to ask her, and again the only answer he received was this: "You would be sorry if I took it off, and so I will not take it off." Well, of course, when they were courting, and of course when they were newlyweds, he was happy to receive this answer. But time passed, And the man became more and more dissatisfied with this explanation. And soon he became obsessed with this black ribbon. What was it? What was up with his wife? Why in the world won't she take it off? What's under the ribbon that she's trying to hide? And finally, the curiosity became too great for him to bear, and he woke up before his wife, and he went into her sewing box, and he got a pair of scissors. And slowly, as she slept, he cut the ribbon that was around her neck. And with the very last snip of the scissors, his wife's eyes opened and she woke up with a start, and her head fell off the bed and rolled onto the floor, while the woman's lips mouthed the words, "I told you you'd be sorry." I've got Michelle on Skype for our Ghost Stories broadcast. How you doing, Michelle?
Very well, thank you.
Do you believe in ghosts?
No, I don't. And I never have either.
But you have a ghost story?
Yes, yeah. I had an encounter with a ghost in my bedroom a few years back. And I was sleeping, and I woke up in the middle of the night. I don't know exactly what time it was. And I looked over towards my doorway, and I saw a child, a young girl in a dress with long hair, and her face was all white. And I was terrified. I was like, "What? There's a child in my room." And I lived in an older house at the time, and so I was like, "Oh, it must, it's a child that lived in the house, years past." And I was petrified in bed. And I was, half pretending to be asleep, but watching it and it's just staring at me. And part of my brain is saying, "You don't believe in ghosts." And another part of my brain is like, "Yeah, but you're looking at a ghost right now. So how do you not believe in ghosts?" And honestly, I have no idea how long I lied there like that and trying to, figure out what to do, or why isn't it going away? So who knows how long it was? It could have been a minute. It could have been half an hour. And then finally, I guess maybe I woke up enough. I was like, I'm getting out of bed and I'm going to get this ghost. It's only 5 feet away to my doorway. And I get up, and moonlight or street lights were shining in the window on a coat on the back of my door. It's a coat that's been there all the time, but just the way the light hit it.
What explains the hair and the physical attributes beyond just the arms and shoulders?
There was a scarf that was above it, like on a loop. And then the way the light hit it, my brain saw a girl. And I was like, part of me was like, so happy that I figured it out. And so happy that I got out. I was able to force myself to get out of bed, because, if I didn't get out of bed, would I have gone back to sleep and told everybody the next day I saw a ghost?
How could you have gone back to sleep if you were being watched by a child in the closet or whatever?
Fair. So, that's how I convinced myself to get out of bed. It's because I wasn't going to be going back to sleep anytime soon. So.
It reminds me, I remember I visited a friend in Dallas. He does a huge Halloween display every year. It's his favorite holiday. And I was staying in his guest room and did not realize that he had his witch decoration in the closet. And the closet door was cracked. And as I was lying there, I look up and I see this dark witch-hatted figure outlined in the closet. And of course, immediately I knew what it was, but it didn't make it for me much less creepy. I was just laying there being watched by this witch decoration.
Well, and that's where I hung my coat all the time. But I was waking up in the middle of the night. I had no idea what it was, and it was a child. That's what I saw. And I still hang my coats on the back of my door.
And that's one of the reasons why Michelle still does not believe in ghosts, right there.
Yes.
So, well, thanks for sharing your story, and I hope you have a wonderful Halloween holiday season, okay?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
On the switchboard, I have area code 506. You're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. Who's this?
My name is Pat.
Pat, we're talking about ghost stories and Halloween-type stuff today. What do you have for the broadcast?
Back in '86, my stepfather had passed away from cancer at the age of 59. We were at the funeral home during visitation. It was in the evening. And we had gotten word that his sons from a previous marriage wanted him taken to his hometown and buried there, which was about an hour and a half from where we were currently living. This was quite distressing for us because we felt that he would have wanted to be buried there where we were currently living, and we were quite upset about it, so we were discussing that. And we were in the parlor, and my mom had said, I'm sure he would have wanted to have been buried here. And just as she said that, there was a lamp in the room that had multiple incandescent bulbs in it. And one of the lights in the array had dimmed perhaps about half power. It was very obvious, and we all kind of looked at it. And it stayed dim for a few seconds, and then it returned to full power. We all kind of looked at each other, and it's like, what was that? And we just found it really, really odd. So in fact, my mom, I believe, made a joke saying, well, that was him speaking to us and we were just really perplexed by it. And so a few minutes had passed, and his sons had came down, and they entered into the funeral home. And as soon as they walked into the room, the exact same thing happened. This one particular bulb in this lamp had dimmed for several seconds and then returned to full power. And we just all looked at each other. Now, at the time, I was a fundamentalist Christian, and I really, really didn't believe in ghosts. I had no problem in believing in a talking snake and all of the other weird stuff that could go along with Christianity, or unbelievable stuff. But I wasn't really convinced that there in the existence of ghosts. But my mother and my sister, my brother, they did believe in that. And they were convinced that that was my father signaling to us that he did not want to be buried. So I remember him trying to come up with some sort of a rational explanation. But I was at a loss, because I thought, well, what would cause just that one bulb to dim? If there was something happening that increased the power load, wouldn't all the bulbs dim? And I remember afterwards, I had opportunity to speak to the funeral director, and I had asked him. I didn't tell him what happened. I just said to him, I said, is there anything in the funeral home that would cause that to happen? And he said, no, not that I'm aware of. So it really gave me pause at the time.
Did that affect where they buried your stepfather? I mean, he'd given a sign according to the more religious people in the room, right?
Yes. But we were, the issue was my mother and my stepfather were not legally married. They were living common law. So we had no legal recourse to make sure that he was buried there. So he did end up being returned to his hometown per his son's wishes.
Are they still convinced it was a message from the beyond?
Well, my mother has passed away, but my sister, I'm sure, she's always been a believer in the supernatural. And although we haven't discussed it recently, I'm pretty sure that she still believes in that. Yes.
But you believed in spirits at the time. You didn't buy it?
Well, I just for some reason, I guess there was a part of me that was skeptical. As I said, I had no problem in accepting that a man was raised from the dead and he walked on water, and that a man spent 3 days in the belly of a great fish, and man, the whole Adam and Eve thing. But I just was skeptical that ghosts exist. But this really did give me pause, but I never fully accepted it as a supernatural event, though.
Isn't it funny how the mind works?
It
is
the
stuff we reject and the stuff we accept. It really is an interesting sort of social experiment to watch how we proceed when it comes to these sorts of events.
It absolutely is, yes.
Well, you enjoyed the Halloween holiday, I'm guessing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't really take part in it per se, but I just love the feel of it. I love the atmosphere. I love the decorations, and it's perhaps my favorite holiday.
Well, if I could make any recommendation for the Halloween season here in 2016, it would be do not go outside dressed as a clown, and for your own safety, just don't do it. All right.
I will be sure and follow that advice.
Absolutely. Have a happy Halloween, and thanks again for being a part of the broadcast.
Thank you, Seth. It was my pleasure.
All right, my friends, I'm going to cap our broadcast. Actually, it sort of constitutes the last third of the entire radio show. It is a long-form piece. It is a produced ghost story called The Handprint. I, in the past couple of years, have done an original work to cap the show, and people have been very kind and said they've enjoyed them. Most people said they've enjoyed them. It's funny, when you do creative work, it's a cycle. You start with an idea and you say, that's a great idea. And then you get into the process and you begin creating and massaging and changing and altering and going back to the original, and you do all these things. And by the time it's over, quite often you look at it and you have no idea what you have. And there comes a point when you just put it out there. You just say, all right, it is what it is. I hope everybody enjoys this. I hope this enhances in some way your Halloween holiday. It is a piece you will want to listen to without distraction if possible. So if you're in a busy place, a well-lit place, if you can't spare the time at this moment to really take the journey, hit pause, come back whenever you can do it right. And I hope you enjoyed the next 30 minutes. The piece again is called The Handprint. Mom, there's a handprint on my window. Hannah didn't joke about these things. And while she was a character, she wasn't an actor. She wasn't a young kid with a runaway imagination. She was a young woman, a freshman in college, still living at home in the second bedroom between the master and the garage. Her single window facing the alley that separated their house and the neighbors. A window that saw only the brick and narrow grass, and maybe a glint of sunlight for a few moments at midday. Except for the passing of the lawnmower every other weekend, no one passed by. Mom, there's a handprint on my window. The fear in her voice was real. Michelle was driving home from work, the phone on hands-free, her daughter's voice filling the car with panic. Where are you? How long are you going to be? Please, get home. I'm coming, baby. I'm sure it's nothing. Just don't go outside and make sure the doors and windows are all locked up tight. I'm 10 minutes away. Just keep me on speaker and talk to me. It's all right. It's going to be all right. It's probably nothing. That was Michelle's first thought. A smudge. Something that looked like a palm and thumb and fingers. And Hannah caught it out of the corner of her eye and just wigged out. We've all had those moments when some innocuous thing gave us the chills, and then later we laughed about it. It's okay, baby. She spoke the words of comfort and diffusion as she drove toward home. I'm 5 minutes away, honey. I'm 2 minutes away. I'm turning into the neighborhood. I'm pulling into the garage. Hannah was standing in the open door to the house as the garage door lulled upward, and her mother pulled in. Hannah had one foot on the garage's concrete floor, like she needed to be at least partially out of the house until someone else was there with her. Show me, Michelle said, and they walked through the garage entrance door, through the laundry room and down past the second bathroom to the open door of Hannah's bedroom. Even through the door you could already see the window, and in the light of late afternoon, you could clearly see the imprint of a hand. Not a series of smudges that looked like a handprint, an actual handprint. Both mother and daughter just stood there, as still as the air. Michelle didn't feel the chill and fear that her daughter had, but it was a sobering moment. Why would a handprint be on the window? It was here that the rationalizations and explanations began. Maybe one of the guys mowing the neighbor's lawn had leaned against it during a break. Maybe the technician had left it when he was out fixing the air conditioner, the unit right outside the window. Maybe it was just a teenager pranking people around the neighborhood, scaring them for laughs. Hannah stared at the print. None of those explanations were going to work for her. Mom, that's scary. Someone put a hand on my window. And I could swear I saw somebody down the street when I got home. He looked like he was watching me. How far away? Did you recognize his face? Was he just out walking his dog or something? Hannah couldn't really say. It was more of an impression than anything, an outline well past the focus of her vision, way down the line of houses, a dark shape, distant and anonymous. She'd gotten a strange feeling, like she was being watched, but she blinked it away and walked inside the house. Michelle walked the perimeter. A few days ago, she'd have charged her husband for perimeter duty. But he'd walked out after a heated argument, yet another explosion of shouts and exasperated gestures and tears. Michelle and Thomas had been married for 21 years, 19 of them happy. The last 2 years of distance and division were punctuated by these eruptions of irritation and dissatisfaction and misery and pain, and on Wednesday, Thomas had tossed a suitcase in his car and sped away. He'd had enough. He couldn't take it anymore. And he was done. His tires screeching his resentment, his fury as he disappeared. The expression on his face almost frightening. Hannah would not forgive her father for this. Not ever. Thomas had adored his daughter. He showered her with gifts and goodness and constant reminders of his love. He had always been there for her. When she was just a baby, he'd written her a lullaby about his great love. It's a song he would sing to her throughout the years, a song that began with the words, "Hannah, darling, I will never leave you." And yet he did leave. She had never seen him so angry, so heartbroken, so desperate to get out, away from her mother, away from this family. Away from her? Michelle continued her march around the outside of the house. Nothing moved, nothing broken, no sign of footsteps, although you probably wouldn't see footprints in the grass. She checked the security cameras, an inexpensive system they'd installed just a few years ago. 5 cameras recording 24 hours a day. The recording was choppy, but clear enough there was no sign of anyone, anywhere. Finally, as the sun began to set, she took a wet cloth and washed the print from the glass until the window was pristine and clear once again. Michelle sensed no real danger, but Hannah slept in her mother's bed anyway that night. It was now just them, mother and daughter, living inside the 4-bedroom house. Through the tempest and uncertainty, they had only each other to lean on. They awoke with the sun and the alarm clock, Hannah off to school and Michelle back to work, the events of the previous day in the back of their minds. Hannah's thoughts turned occasionally to the window, and there were a couple of times between classes that she felt that familiar sensation, the feeling of being watched. She'd look around, but the mass of people made it impossible to focus on any single figure. Hannah and Michelle coordinated their return home, arriving at the same time, and there were no surprises when both women pulled into the driveway. A quick hug, they unloaded the groceries out of Mom's car, and they started their evening together. The house was missing something, missing someone, and the two found themselves watching the front door, waiting for Thomas's return. He hadn't called, he wouldn't return calls. He'd walked out on them both. And the void he left was like the empty chair at the dining room table, aching to be filled. It was Friday night, the end of a long week. This night, Hannah slept in her own room. As the next morning was Saturday, there was no alarm, and Hannah's eyes took their sweet time to open. It was after 11, almost lunchtime, and the drowsy 18-year-old in the raggedy t-shirt and soccer shorts was indistinguishable from the mountain of blankets around her. Daylight squinted into the room. Hannah's eyelids slowly opened. The pupils drew focus, and she absorbed her surroundings. Some oil paintings she'd tacked to the wall, a cell phone on the charger, several piles of clothes, a vanity mirror surrounded by light bulbs, something you might see in a stage actor's dressing room. Sitting in a ceramic cup was a rose her father had folded from paper. She'd long ago colored its petals red, and she kept it on the second shelf by the closet. There was a portable record player, a dresser topped with rings and car keys and a few coins, and the various things that throughout the week had been yanked out of her pocket. The window blinds. the window blinds. It was only a second before the spaces between the blinds revealed their awful surprise. Again, the outline of a human hand. The clear print of a palm and thumb and large fingers, as clear as if the print had been painted there by a brush. She was out of her room in a second, onto her mother's bed, but of course Michelle's day had begun long before now, and so the room-to-room search began. "Mom! Mom!" Hannah yelled with increasing urgency, and her mother rushed in from the living room. "What, honey?" Hannah said nothing. She just grabbed her mother's hand and dragged her toward the second bedroom between the master and the garage, wide-eyed and breathing heavily, pointing to the handprint on the glass. The window was locked. That was the first thing, the most important thing. The window was still locked. But who would do this? In the middle of the night? How would they do this? Why would they do this? She quickly marched outside to the north alley for a closer look. Again, no footprint or sign of mischief. The ground undisturbed. The gate closed. Again, she checked the security footage, scrolling through hour after hour of the recording. Specifically, the camera facing down the north alleyway between the houses. Nothing. No one. Nobody had been there. The police officers, when they arrived, were professional and courteous, but they found no more clues than she had. After the most basic of interviews, they said good day and that they'd keep an eye on the house and the neighborhood. Hannah didn't even come outside. She just sat in the living room, in the center of the house, television off, her gaze locked onto the blank taupe of the painted wall. Her imagination vividly picturing a hand which had at some moment in the darkness of night pressed its flesh against the cold glass and left its signature for her to find. The more she considered it, the more her bones turned to ice. Michelle again spoke the words of comfort, but this time they rang less true because they did not come from a place of conviction. Michelle was also a bit afraid. Only a tiny pane of glass had separated her child from the reaching hand that had at this moment no body, no face, no identity. After hours of procrastination, and with the sun dropping low into the early evening sky, she steeled herself and again walked outside to remove the print. She kept the rag in her left hand. With her right hand, she took a picture with her cell phone. Several pictures, actually. One close, one of each fingertip, and a wider photo which revealed the window and the surrounding brick. I don't know how it might be useful, she thought, but it might be useful. And with that, she slipped the phone into her back pocket and brought the Windex and the rag to bear. And yet the sprays and spritzes and swipes would not remove the hand from its place on the window pane. The bulky smudge and hard outline of the palm, thumb, and fingers remained fast and clear and undimmed. And it was at this very moment that Michelle's heart nearly collapsed from fright, as she realized that the handprint was on the inside of the glass. She stood in the sliver between the houses, frozen with confusion and fear. Through the window, she could see the distant moving of Hannah's frame as she walked innocuously from kitchen to bathroom, appearing in the hallway for only an instant as she passed. One hand oddly splayed outward. But Michelle felt something else. In the growing haze of dusk, just to her left, she perceived a distant figure, a dark shape. And then the shape drifted and was gone. It's perhaps one of the scariest of places, that space between perception and reality. What did I just see? I know I'm not crazy. Am I going crazy? It's my eyes, it's my imagination. It happened. Or did it happen? Michelle walked briskly back inside. The cameras covering the front door and the back and the garage, they revealed that no one at any time had entered this house. No one else had been in this house. She checked every room and rechecked every room. There was nothing. There was no one but Hannah and her. She didn't tell Hannah about the print on the inside of the window. On this night, she did ask Hannah to again crawl into the master bed under the pretense that it was for her daughter's comfort. In truth, Michelle simply wanted to keep a very close eye on Hannah. Did Hannah do this? Was the print on her daughter's window some kind of acting out after her father's departure? Had she been sleepwalking? Michelle and Hannah lay in bed and talked, as parent and child, as friends, until they could no longer stave off exhaustion, and finally they drifted off to sleep. In the peace and the stillness and the darkness, the scariest sounds are not the ones that go bump in the night. The scariest sounds are sometimes the smallest, like the sound of someone breathing, the sound of whispers, the sound of someone working the latch of the window right next to you. Michelle bolted upright in bed and looked. In the faint moonlight, the window latch rocking from the lock position, millimeters from release, back and forth, and inches below on the glass of the window, the unmistakable print of a hand. "Hannah, wake up!" She roused her daughter from sleep just as the window shuttered with a bang. They both flew backward, off the bed, onto the floor, and suddenly another sound, a bone-rattling scream. They screamed in terror, scrambling, orienting, finding each other in the dark. Finally, they were on their feet, fleeing, flying through the bedroom door and down the hallway toward the house entrance. Do they lock themselves in? Do they go outside? What do they do? The next sound they heard was the turning of a doorknob and the guttural moan of the wood as it bowed like a wooden dam ready to burst. "Call the cops. Where's my cell phone?" Michelle suddenly asked herself. Back in the bedroom, on the charger by the nightstand, right next to Hannah's phone on the very same outlet. Damn it! The phones were plugged in just below the hand-printed window. With whatever it was at the front door, she decided to chance it. Hannah clutched at her shirt as they both burst back down the hallway, eyes wild and brimming with fear, back into the master bedroom, where a tall figure stood just inside the open window. Inside the room, inside the house, a dark shape, outlined by an ethereal blue, imposing and sinister, eyes piercing through the black and absolutely terrifying. And then, the shape was upon them. Michelle was crushed by the force of it, smashing backward into the corridor, which erupted in an explosion of drywall and dust. Everything was blurry, everything was upside down and then sideways, and then hot and then frigid. The noise of her daughter's screams rang the alarm into her ears, but she had lost the ability to see, a warm crimson blinding her vision. Hannah was in the grip of the thing, screaming for help, flailing to get free, clutching at the tile and carpet and doorways and furniture. She resisted the pull of the force which was dragging her by her legs, away from the master bedroom, crashing down through the hallway past the kitchen, flailing by the entrance to the dining room, screaming in desperation and fear. She could see the back door rushing toward her. She was going to be taken out of the house, outside. To what destination and for what purpose she could not begin to comprehend. Another crash. Michelle was awake and upon the thing. clutching and clawing and fighting to protect her only child. And again the otherworldly howl. Michelle was disoriented, still attached by the fingernails to the agent which sought to steal into the canopy of night with her baby girl. It was all happening so fast. The senses couldn't keep up. But as her fight for their lives continued, she became acutely aware that she was not fighting against ghost or ghoul, devil or demon, phantasm or spirit, but against skin and hair and tooth and fingernail and blood and bone. She flailed at the monster upon her with every object she could find in the darkness, but it would not be abated. She was as blind as the beggar, off course and roiling in a place she ordinarily knew like the back of her hand. And again she felt the force of the monster's rage against her skull. And again she met with sharp pain, bright light, and the black of unconsciousness. It was for a second. Again the shrieks of her daughter reached through Michelle's ears and into the heart of her, awakening her to the sight of Hannah's twisting head and grasping arms on the floor, her legs and feet in the air being dragged through the open back door. Michelle's hands found the carving knife in the drawer. She grabbed it, she reared back with the blade locked in her hands, and she lunged. But she could not move. And her hand and the carving knife were locked in space. The lights flickered and fluttered. There was the buzz of electricity. A surreal sepia hue covered the room. Michelle's eyes drifted to the side where she saw her daughter's body blown backward, horizontal, suspended 10 inches above the ground, floating like the still frame of a home movie, a look of frozen shock upon Hannah's face. Slowly, Michelle turned her eyes forward again. Paralyzed in the frame of the doorway was the malevolent shape, now faintly recognizable as the same shape seen in her periphery outside the house just a few hours before. The shape, the now unmistakably human shape, that had for days crept in the shadows and stalked the school grounds, designing in its sinister mind the violence of this night and delighting in the idea of the unspeakable acts to follow. A monster among us. At this second, he also hung in the air, neck twisted as if he hung from a noose, his fingers splayed, his body wriggling, his eyes pried wide open, his gaze jutting from left to right in panic. At this second, it was he who convulsed in someone else's grasp. His suspended, helpless body slowly drifted forward, across the threshold, back into the house. On the glass of the back door, there appeared the shape of a palm, then a thumb, and 4 fingers. And as the handprint appeared, the door slammed shut. On the pane of every window, living room and bedroom and dining room and kitchen, on the pane of every window, the same imprint of the same hand appeared, one after the other, as if something invisible was holding the house in its place. And the room drew deathly silent. The house again filled with a cacophonous noise. The mother frozen, the daughter suspended, the man in the dirty black sweater and overcoat dangling like an ornament, his arms and fingers outstretched, his feet drifting slightly from right to left. And then the clock on the wall rattled. The little hand deadlocked at 37 seconds and suspended there. Suddenly, the hand clicked backward. 36. And again, 35. Tick, 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 click, click, click. As the second hand marched, the latches of every window flicked back and forth in time with it. The locks on the doors switched from closed to open in step. 20, 19, 18, 17. The man in black yelled with fright as tiny indentions appeared just below his chin. Michelle and Hannah could see through the dim light, could see the tracings around the man's throat. The tracings of a palm, a thumb, and 4 large fingers. 7, 6, 5. The crazed man shrieked in his helplessness. 4, 3, 2. His mouth opened to rotten teeth and unfurled tongue. He screamed again. 1, 0. A sickening crack and a cacophonous collapse of esophagus and larynx and spine. The life snapped out of him by the tightening throttle of an unseen hand. The body hung there in space, slightly swinging, like the body of the condemned drifting under the gallows. And as the suspended shell of the man hung there in space, the door behind him slowly opened again, slowly opened, to reveal the blue of the moonlit night outside. And the broken body began its drift backward. Backward, over the tile floor, over the threshold, over the back porch steps, backward, away, away between the dogwood trees near the property line, back through the thicket of branches, past them into distant shadows. The outline of the outstretched body finally becoming undetectable above the dark blue horizon, drifting through the night, all through the night, to a destination far away from this place and this moment, where it would eventually, finally fall and sprawl and rot in the remote and black of anonymity, never to be seen again. As the body disappeared from view, Michelle and Hannah finally found purchase against the air that imprisoned them, and they found each other's arms, embracing each other, clutching at each other, so overwhelmed that for a few seconds neither could really speak, their gasps the only sound. And a glint of moonlight again gave shape to the palm and thumb and fingers, the handprints on the windows all around them, hanging on the glass like a soul hanging between this world and the next. As each of them summoned the courage to stand, the sound of quiet rustling could be heard on the other side of the room. On the table by the window, scattered letters and bills and notices and papers, flitting and fluttering and drifting and separating. One by one, falling from their perch to land on the ground, until only a single sheet of paper remained. Slowly, deliberately, it began to crease and fold and turn, and crease and fold and turn. The creation of one thing from another, purposeful, persistent, peaceful, until there lay on the table a perfect paper rose, identical to the one in the ceramic cup on the second shelf of the second bedroom between the master and the garage. The gift formed so many years ago by a father's hands. Hannah could not yet know that he had not abandoned her. The very Wednesday night he'd stormed from the house and sped off in a fury, he had soon turned back for home with tears in his eyes and a penitent heart. no one had witnessed his drift from the highway on a slippery, wet road in the darkness of night, his plummet down the ravine, and his tragic end upon the rocks hidden under the thick canopy of trees, where his car would not be discovered for several more days, his lifeless body disturbed only by the occasional vibration of the cell phone in his pocket, the calls from home unanswered, the messages unreturned. But he had made a promise to his family. He had sung a promise to his baby girl, a promise of love and protection, a promise that would not be stymied by the grave, a promise that he would come to keep, quite literally, with his very own hand.
Hannah, darling, I will never leave you. Come to me and cleave to. Let my arms receive you. Daddy loves you, Daddy loves you. I will love you now forever. Rest, my darling, cradled in my arms. I'll hold you safe and warm. I'll keep you free from harm, child. Daddy loves you, Daddy loves you, always loves you, now forevermore.
Thank you so much for listening to the broadcast today. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I do hope your holiday is filled with tricks and treats and frights and sweets, and I hope you have a wonderful, memorable, and safe October 31st. Happy Halloween.